What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my main channel, so if you're interested in what if Naruto had Madara and the Kyubi sealed inside of him, or what if Naruto was Ice Guide to Game of Thrones, go check out my main channel. And if you're interested in what if Naruto was a assassin in Westeros, or what if Naruto was trained by a Sith Lord, go check out my third channel. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. Inoichi Yamanaka's residence. Ino-chan, can you come in here for a minute? Kiku Yamanaka called from the living room. Despite what most people would expect from hearing the Yamanaka name, Kiku did not have blonde hair. Her light brown hair hung loosely halfway down her back, though she often wore it in a ponytail when she was working. While she had married into the Yamanaka clan, she was not a ninja, nor did she have any desire to be. She had grown up working in her parents' flower shop and continued to do so even after marriage. Her husband Inoichi actively encouraged her in her efforts, as he knew how much the shop meant to her, especially after her parents passed away. It was fortunate that he had the additional income from the shop had proven to be a godsend after the tailed beast's attack and the increased mission fees that followed. Kiku also had Inoichi wrapped around her finger and knew it, though she didn't abuse that fact. Her daughter had inherited her mother's grace and charming personality, and was similarly successful in manipulating her father along with many other people. Coming, Ka-chan. Ino's voice called from the upper floor, quickly followed by the rapid thumping of her feet as she ran down the stairs. She burst into the living room at full speed, nearly tripping over the table before she came to stop in front of the couch where her mother was currently seated. Even at 4 years old, Ino already had the delicate features and fair complexion that promised great beauty later in life. Her blonde hair was shoulder length and pulled into a ponytail, and she was wearing a light blue dress and sandals. Ino, how many times have I told you not to run down the stairs? Kiku said, her voice stern. Ino winced, then said contritely, sorry Ka-chan. Deciding it would be better to change the topic, she asked, what did you want me for, Ka-chan? Kiku shook her head in exasperation, but let the issue go for the moment. Well, your father and I had a very important talk last night and wanted to let you know about what is going to happen. It's not anything bad, Kiku hastened to add, seeing Ino's face begin to crumple with worry. In fact, I think you will be very happy, but it will cause some changes. Ino quickly calmed down after her mother's reassurances. The vague nameless fears her fledgling imagination had conjured up vanishing under her mother's soothing voice. What's going to change? What did you and Tu-chan talk about? She asked. Well, you know how your Tu-chan helps people sometimes, she nodded, silently, vaguely aware that her father's job sometimes included talking to people for a long time and that they felt better afterwards. She could understand that. She always felt better when her father talked to her, so why wouldn't everyone else? Well, there's a little boy who was hurt very badly. Remember how you felt when your arm broke and how your Tu-chan and I helped you and made you feel better? Well, this little boy was hurt even more, and he doesn't have a Tu-chan or a Ka-chan to help him feel better, her mother said softly. She started tearing up, imagining how horrible she would have felt without her parents around when she was hurt. That's so sad, she cried out, hoping that this story got better soon. Kiku smiled, pleased at her daughter's empathy and how well the conversation was going so far. We think so too, which is why we have decided to help him. We want him to come live with us from now on so that he has a Tu-chan and a Ka-chan and even a Ne-chan to help him out. I know you always wanted a little brother, and now you'll have one. Ino was surprised at this turn in the conversation, but Kiku had presented the argument well. She had picked up quite a few tricks from Inoichi over the years and understood how her daughter thought. Ino's face scrunched up thoughtfully as she mulled this new information over in her head. He'll live with us, yes, from now on, and you'll make him feel better. Yes, we will. Kiku knew a little about the situation and wasn't quite as confident internally, but knew better than to express doubt right now. She hesitated for a few seconds before she blurted out her next question. And you'll still be my Ka-chan and Tu-chan? Ino asked, her voice uncertain. Her mother swiftly moved from the couch to kneel in front of Ino and pulled her into a tight hug. Always, Ino-chan, we love you and wouldn't let you go for anything. Ino reveled in her mother's embrace, letting the warmth she felt wash her insecurities away. After a minute, she pulled back slightly and asked, with a sly grin on her face, can I make him call me Ne-chan? Kiku giggled softly, relaxing as Ino apparently accepted the upcoming change in her life. We'll see, honey, we'll see. Ino giggled along with her mother. What's his name? What's he like? She asked after she calmed down. Well, his name is Naruto. He's really smart and he likes to study a lot. He also has a sense of humor, though your Tu-chan told me about this one time when Naruto-kun was talking to his teacher and Konoha. Inoichi nervously ran his hand through his hair again as he and Naruto walked along the road towards his home. He knew Kiku had agreed with the idea of adopting Naruto. They both knew that was what was happening, even if the official paperwork would list the arrangement as a long-term medical treatment, but he was worried about how Ino would take it. This was all happening very fast. and he was unsure if his daughter would accept the intrusion of another child into their daily lives. He had great respect for Naruto and his burden, but if this jeopardized his relationship with his own daughter, he would call it off in a heartbeat. Hopefully things would go smoothly, though he also understood the reason for walking through the town while under the effects of a henge, the technique disguising both himself and Naruto. While the technique wouldn't withstand close scrutiny, it was more than enough for the short walk to his home. It was much safer to delay the revelation of Naruto's survival and new placement until additional security measures were put in place in and around his home. Naruto had raised no objections when the Hokage applied the technique for him, as he lacked the training necessary to apply it himself. Inoichi glanced over at the child walking beside him. Naruto had a small smile on his face as he walked quickly, keeping up with Inoichi's longer stride. Inoichi had initially tried to hold Naruto's hand as they left ANBU HQ through one of the low-profile exits, but Naruto had refused point blank. Inoichi had then attempted to set a slow pace in deference to Naruto's age and size, but Naruto seemed to resent the implication that he couldn't keep up and started walking quickly, actually pulling ahead of Inoichi for a time. Perhaps this display of speed and endurance was another expression of Naruto's need to prove himself as capable even against a much older and more experienced shinobi. Come to think of it, Inoichi had never actually seen Naruto look tired. Sleepy, yes, but not tired was that mentioned in the reports, or Inoichi shook his head. He was getting sidetracked from the issue at hand. Looking ahead, Inoichi could already see his house looming in the distance. He'd never felt nervous about coming home before, but the uncertain reception awaiting him had his nerves jangling. He could just picture his daughter's betrayed face staring at him accusingly, tears in her eyes. He would defend himself, but she would refuse to hear his excuses, his pleas for clemency, and she would turn her back on him, refusing to call him Yamanaka-san any longer. Wait, that wasn't Yamanaka-san, Naruto said again. Inoichi pulled himself out of his thoughts and looked at Naruto. Yes, Naruto-kun. He'd already resolved to get Naruto to call him something less formal, though from what he'd heard about the Hokage's and Shizen-sama's troubles and their efforts to do the same, he expected it would take quite a while. That was a problem for later, though. Is this our destination? Naruto asked, pointing ahead. He looked in the direction Naruto was pointing and found himself staring at the front gate of his own home only a few feet away. Yes, this is our home, Inoichi responded. Naruto cocked his head to the side as he took in the residence. Inoichi turned to look as well, trying to see his home through another person's eyes. It proved difficult, as everywhere he looked evoked memories, some sad, but most quite happy and peaceful. The two-story building was painted a pale yellow, the white columns supporting the roof of the wraparound porch providing a nice contrast to the color of the house itself. The yard surrounded the house on all sides, and from their current spot in front of the main gate a small swing set and sandbox were just visible in the backyard. The entire lot was surrounded by a low stone wall tastefully adorned with vines. What really drew the eye, however, were the flower beds scattered throughout the yard. Each flower bed had a distinct theme, yet when seen as a whole they blended together. Each group of flowers had been carefully selected to complement those around it while still providing something unique and beautiful. It was his wife's pride and joy, and the loving care with which she attended to the yard showed. Inoichi finally looked back to Naruto, who seemed to have finished his own appraisal. It's nice, he said, apparently struggling with the words. He paused for a minute thinking, then added, peaceful. Ah, thank you, Naruto-kun, I'm glad you like it. Inoichi said. Naruto smiled at him, but it was a fake. I'm smiling because I'm supposed to smile. Perhaps he didn't like it after all. Setting aside that concern for the moment, Inoichi moved the rest of the way to the house itself and entered, only dispelling the henge technique once the door had closed behind them. Kiku-chan, we're home, Inoichi called out. He could barely make out some rapid whispering from the living room. He was rather startled when Naruto's head swiveled in that direction, and a surprised look crossed his face. Could Naruto make out what they were saying? None of the reports mentioned that his hearing was unusually good. Inoichi sighed and added another item to the rapidly growing list of things he needed to learn about Naruto. He was a little disturbed at just how long that list already was, and it promised to grow much longer before he was done. We're in the living room, Inoichi-kun, Kiku called out, her tone happy. Inoichi felt some of the tension drain from his shoulders. If she was happy, then Ino had taken the news well. The real test was about to begin, but it was a good sign. The Yamanaka clan had led Naruto from the small entranceway of the house into the living room. He made sure that the first thing he did once he entered the room was to look straight at Ino and give her a happy smile. Sure enough, Ino was watching him carefully and smiled back once she saw his face. She then turned to look at Naruto and immediately stiffened her eyes wide. Inoichi began to panic as he snapped his head around to look at Naruto. What had he missed? Was Naruto scowling? Did he look unhappy? He wasn't bleeding or hurt and his clothes were fine. What was Ino reacting to? His thoughts were interrupted when she let out a loud squeal and jumped on Naruto, hugging him with all her strength. "You didn't tell me he had blonde hair. He really is like a little brother. This is great," Ino shouted happily. Naruto appeared to be enduring the treatment well, though his hands had moved as if to push Ino away from him before settling on patting her shoulder awkwardly. Inoichi staggered slightly and exchanged a disbelieving look with his wife. All their preparation and worry and Ino focused on his hair color as the deciding factor. Kushu continued to pat the small blonde girl. Ino, he reminded himself on the shoulder. He had expected a reaction similar to what he saw in the orphanage, not this joyful reception. He had not been aware that human children placed such a strong emphasis on hair color, though come to think of it, none of the children in the orphanage had blonde hair. He heard Inoichi clear his throat expectantly and realized he was supposed to introduce himself at this point, right? His tone should be slightly nervous, a touch excited. Of course that didn't mean he couldn't cheat. "Hello, I'm Naruto. It's nice to meet you, Ino Ne-chan." Her shriek of delight as he addressed her as his big sister almost deafened him, but it was worth it to make sure he was accepted quickly by the child of the household. He would like to say he deduced this aspect of Ino's personality from her earlier words in combination with Inoichi's repeated use of the phrase big sister in their conversation, but that would be a lie. He had overheard Ino's whispered conversation with her mother after he entered the house and learned just what to say to make the best impression. Kushu kept his arms around Ino as she bounced in place, beaming at everyone in the room. Inoichi glanced at him with an odd look on his face, but it soon gave way to happiness as Ino's joy permeated the room. The tension Kushu had seen build up in the walk from ANBU HQ had vanished entirely. Kushu then turned to look at the other person in the room. The mother, Kiku, he thought Inoichi had said, was watching her daughter with a bemused and happy smile, recalling that adult females liked it when treated as though they were younger. Kushu struck again, making sure he smiled while he did so. Making a good impression would make sure he stayed. A ninja household with its promised resources and connections might even prove to be more useful in the long term than ANBU HQ. "Yamanaka-san, you didn't tell me I would have two Ne-chans," he said, looking at the mother pointedly. Kiku blushed, slightly pleased at the compliment, while Inoichi gaped, looking at the boy as if he'd never seen him before. "Inoichi didn't tell me you were such a charmer." "Naruto-kun," Kiku said. "I'm Ino's mother." "Kiku, you can call me Kaha-san too if you'd like. So far so good." "Now not too confident, a little shy." "All right Kiku." "Kaha-san," he said hesitantly, moving his eyes away. Kiku smiled fondly at his supposed embarrassment while Inoichi was watching him with another odd expression. Ino continued to bounce up and down in excitement, chattering rapidly about all the things she'd do with her new little brother. Kushu felt a pang of unease as he noticed that Ino had yet to calm down. The girl would stop before too long, he assured himself. It's not like she was that obsessed with the idea of a little brother, was it? Right. Hokage's Tower Council Chambers. The council was originally scheduled to convene this morning to discuss the impending arrival of the diplomatic delegation from Kumogakure no Sato, the village hidden in the clouds. The meeting was mostly a formality to confirm that all the preparations were complete and take care of any last-minute details or problems. While that remained the official purpose for the meeting, Sarutobi, along with Dragon and his newly promoted Jounin commander Shikaku Nara, had come up with a plan to potentially expose the source of the assassination attempt on Naruto. They all agreed that despite the large number of ninja who could have potentially exposed the secret, odds were high that someone on the council had either arranged it or knew about it. At the very least, someone might let something slip and give them a lead. If this plan failed to produce results, they would regroup and consider other more risky ideas. Once all the counselors had taken their seats, Shikaku began the meeting. "The first item on our agenda for today was to discuss the preparations for the Kumo delegation, and while that remains on the list, Hokage Sama has another matter he would like to address first." "Hokage-sama." Sarutobi nodded to Shikaku and then stood clearing his throat. "Esteemed counselors, as you may have heard, there was an incident 2 days ago near the market district. The investigation is ongoing, but I am prepared to release some details. It appears that an unidentified assailant approached a young child leaving the Konoha library, under the pretense of assisting him in carrying the books he had borrowed. After walking with him a short distance, the assailant then fatally stabbed the young child in the heart." Sarutobi's eyes were sharp and searching as he scanned the faces in the room for their reaction. Shikaku and Dragon, along with the ANBU guards stationed around the room, were also watching closely. Cries of disgust and outrage echoed throughout the room, with Fugaku Uchiha looking especially horrified. Fugaku probably saw this as reflecting poorly on the performance of his clan's police force. Sarutobi thought, however, There were two counselors, both civilians, who for a brief moment had smiles on their faces. Naoki Taniguchi and Harumi Kondo. The desire to strike them down that very moment was surprisingly strong, but Sarutobi kept himself under control and reminded himself to focus on the bigger picture. For the moment, neither Naoki nor Harumi were supposed to know Naruto's identity, which confirmed that someone somewhere had revealed the secret. He had not noticed any of the ninja revealing anything other than the appropriate surprise and disgust, although Shibi Aburame's brow was furrowed slightly, a sign that might as well be screaming out loud for the carefully disciplined ninja. While none of the clan heads outside of Shikaku knew the identity of the supposedly murdered child for certain, it would not surprise him if the highly intelligent and logical Aburame already had strong suspicions at this point. Naoki apparently couldn't resist a bit of subtle gloating as he spoke up before the Hokage could continue. You said the assailant was unidentified, Hokage-sama. Does that mean he got away? His voice was concerned and troubled, but his eyes were laughing. The Hokage grinned, his expression feral. Oh no, I didn't mean to imply that at all. He is currently in ANBU custody, undergoing a thorough interrogation. Once he has spilled everything he knows, he will undergo a public execution. Konoha will not tolerate anyone attempting to kill children. Naoki looked like someone had punched him in the gut, but he kept himself mostly under control as he slowly sat back in his chair. That's wonderful news, Hokage-sama, he choked out. Beside him, Harumi looked pale and nervous and kept glancing around the room as if she expected to be attacked at any moment. Amateurs. It disgusted Sarutobi that such pathetic people would dare attack Naruto. Apparently it was only now dawning on them that they personally could be in danger from their little plot. They would soon learn just how badly they had been mistaken. The rest of the council nodded grimly in agreement, although a few ninjas were looking at Naoki suspiciously. A faint buzzing could be heard from Shibi Aburame as the insects with which his family formed a symbiotic relationship reflected his agitation. One of the other civilian counselors spoke up next. Hokage-sama, who was the murdered child? The Hokage sighed softly. We are still trying to locate the child's parents or guardians. At this time we are not ready to release any information as to the child's identity. A small lie, but a necessary one for the moment. If Naruto's attackers believed they had succeeded, they would be more likely to gloat or celebrate in some fashion and thus give away their identities. Their ruse had already uncovered Naoki and Harumi as suspects, but there was no guarantee the plot ended with them, and their source still needed to be found. The deception wouldn't last for long, particularly among the ninja of the village, but it would hopefully last long enough if there are no other questions regarding this matter. I will return the floor to Nara-san to continue the meeting. After waiting a few moments for someone else to speak up, Sarutobi returned to his seat and Shikaku resumed the meeting. The discussion regarding the Kumo delegation went quickly as everyone confirmed that their individual tasks had been completed and everything was prepared for the delegation's arrival tomorrow morning. Though the treaty was primarily a ninja matter, the civilians would also be included to begin discussions regarding potential trade agreements. If everything went well, Konoha could be looking at a major boost to trade and the taxes that came with it. While the village was well on their way to recovery, funds were still tight and the ninja especially were overworked and underpaid. That the civilian side was not feeling the pinch nearly as badly as the ninja was a cause of some tension over the past 3 years, though it hadn't moved beyond words yet. After the meeting adjourned, Shibi Aburame approached the Hokage, his insects still buzzing. The Hokage had expected Shibi to approach him, and so lingered to give him the chance. Hokage-sama, Shibi began, his voice low. Is it true that Naruto has been assassinated? Sarutobi chuckled lowly as he had thought Shibi had worked out the supposed identity of the victim. Let's just say that reports of his demise may have been exaggerated. The buzzing noise slowly tapered off as Shibi relaxed. I see, that is good to hear. Shibi paused, then steeled himself and continued to speak. Though it pains me to even think it, I acknowledge the possibility that someone in my clan leaked the information regarding Naruto's identity. I am prepared to cooperate in any way you deem necessary. He bowed stiffly, awaiting the Hokage's judgment. His clan's honor was very important to Shibi, and he would not rest until his clan was cleared of any wrongdoing or the guilty party punished. He sincerely hoped the former proved to be the case. The Hokage nodded solemnly, understanding just how important this was to the Aburame clan leader. I appreciate your cooperation in this matter. Shibi-san, please meet with Shikaku to coordinate your efforts. After Shibi acknowledged the command with another stiff bow, the Hokage laid a friendly hand on Shibi's shoulder. I would rest easy, however we already have another lead and it does not point in the direction of your clan at this time. I hope for both our sakes that remains the case. Outside the Hokage's tower, Fugaku Uchiha's expression was stoic and proud as it should be. He strove to maintain a dignified visage whenever he was in public, and usually even when he was among his clan only. In his own home did he truly relax. To him that was how a ninja should behave. His expression was stoic, but inside he was panicking. Those damned fools, he didn't supply them with Naruto's identity so they could hire a goddamned assassin. If he'd known they would try something that stupid, he would never have approached them in the first place. No amount of influence with the civilians in Konoha was worth bringing Sarutobi's wrath down on his head. He still couldn't believe Naoki was willing to go so far as to kill Naruto himself. Just despite the ninja of the village, Fugaku knew that Naoki didn't really believe that Naruto was a serious threat anymore. Years of proof that the seal was functioning perfectly had taken the wind out of his sails, and he no longer called for the vessel's destruction. Even in their private meetings, that change of heart was part of the reason Fugaku had been willing to reveal Naruto's identity in the first place. He expected Naoki to use the information to his advantage, politically publicly backing Naruto when he joined the ninja force and trying to form connections with a ninja practically guaranteed to be important and powerful. It galled him to know that he had misread Naoki's intentions this badly. After seeing them smile, Kami the idiots actually fucking smiled. He knew it would only be a matter of time until ANBU were dispatched to take them into custody. After that, it was a matter of hours before they spilled everything they knew one way or another. And ANBU would be coming for him next. He needed to regain control of this situation, and fast. He smiled slightly and nodded his head in response to the greetings he received as he walked down the street towards the Uchiha compound. As the chief of the Konoha police, he was one of the most recognized ninja in the village, second only to the Hokage himself. He made sure to maintain a highly visible presence among the civilians, and his efforts had paid off. Among civilians, he was probably even more popular than the Hokage himself, and he did everything in his power to make sure that his popularity continued to grow. It would make things so much easier if when Sarutobi finally died, though even Fugaku didn't wish that to happen too quickly. There was only one true option for his successor. Securing the unanimous support of the civilian side of the council would make sure Fugaku himself was that option. Fugaku, as the chief of police, was intimately familiar with every law in Konoha, including those for the council. While the council was intended to be mostly an advisory body, they did have certain specific duties and powers, most of which had been codified before the civilians had been allowed seats on the council. Once the village grew beyond the capacity of the ninja forces to run by themselves, the 10 seats for the elected civilian representatives had been added. Fortunately for Fugaku, no one had thought to amend the laws concerning the council's powers. In the wake of this addition, the first and most commonly exercised power of the council was their review of any laws. The Hokage had a great deal of power, as he should, but if 2/3 of the council voted against a law, then the law would not be implemented. Similarly, the Hokage could call for a review of an existing law, and if 2/3 of the council found it to be unreasonable, it could be revoked or amended at the Hokage's discretion. Even the Hokage did not have the power to contradict existing law by himself. A measure the first Hokage had insisted on. The council itself could neither propose nor review existing laws on its own, and until the aftermath of the tailed beast's attack, the council had never voted against the Hokage. The second power came into play far more rarely. In the absence of the Hokage, such as when the Hokage dies or is otherwise incapacitated, the council as a whole is tasked with appointing an interim Hokage and selecting the next Hokage, always before the Hokage had publicly chosen a successor. So the council had served a mostly ceremonial function. Sarutobi had yet to select another successor, and every day that passed increased the odds that he would pass away before doing so. Should that happen, a vote would be called to determine the next Hokage, as Fugaku would be nominated and thus ineligible to vote. There would be 21 votes, 10 civilian, 9 ninja. The ANBU commander and the Jounin commander. Fugaku still found it ironic that Shikaku Nara would be allowed 2 votes, as he was both a clan head with a seat on the council and the Jounin commander with the 10 civilian votes secured. Fugaku would only need 2 more votes to achieve the majority required, and he believed he was well on his way to securing those as well. After the loss of the Kayamizu and Murakami clans in the tailed beast's attack, 2 ninja seats on the council were left vacant. It had taken nearly a month for the situation within Konoha to stabilize enough for the council to turn its attention to filling those seats, and in that time another seat had been left vacant, the Senju. That had been a mess of the highest order, and Fugaku was still uncertain what exactly transpired to cause Tsunade to leave. The result was very clear, however. Tsunade Senju had left Konoha and become a missing ninja in all but name. That she was not listed in the bingo book with a bounty, and that Konoha had dispatched no hunter Nin to capture or eliminate her. He attributed to some lingering affection on Sarutobi's part after she Abandoned Konoha. In the village's hour of greatest need, no one on the council was willing to defend her. If any still held some personal attachment to her, they kept it to themselves. When the vote to revoke the Senju seat came up, all the arguments centered on the contributions of the previous Senju, two of whom had served as Konoha's first and second Hokages. Not one person so much as spoke Tsunade's name during the meeting. Fugaku still felt a small glow of victory as he remembered casting his vote to revoke the Senju seat. Not only had the vote been popular with the civilians on the council who resented Tsunade's attempted attack on Naoki Taniguchi, but the Senju and Uchiha had been the two clans who first founded Konoha. Now only the Uchiha remained. Unfortunately, there were no other clans within Konoha that met the population and service requirements to gain a permanent seat on the council. The Kurama were the closest but fell short of the active shinobi requirement by 3 members. The law was very clear about this circumstance, and Fugaku made sure he was the one who informed the council of the required actions. A vote would be held among the remaining council members, and an active ninja in good standing would be selected to fill the seat for a period of 5 years. Said ninja must be unaffiliated with any existing seat by blood adoption or marriage and must remain so during his term. If the ninja occupying the seat became ineligible for any reason and less than 2 years remained in the term, the Hokage would appoint a ninja to hold the seat. Otherwise, a vote would be held to fill the seat for the remainder of the term. At the end of the 5-year term, another survey for suitable clans would be performed, and either a clan appointed to a permanent seat or a vote held for another 5-year term. Fugaku had taken great relish in pointing out that all council members voted on this matter, not just the ninja. The other ninja had objected loudly, but once the laws were reviewed, they had to concede that Fugaku was correct. There was no provision stating that civilians could not vote in such matters. With 10 civilian and 12 ninja votes at the time, there was also no possibility that the council could achieve the 2/3 majority required to amend the law. When the first vote occurred, Fugaku did not have enough influence with the civilian side of the council to convince them to select candidates favorable to him, and he didn't push too hard lest his fellow ninja counselors become suspicious of him. But the first term was ending soon, and now he did 5 years was a long time, and Sarutobi was already old. Even if the Hokage survived the next 5 years, Fugaku had every intention of making sure that the next set of temporary counselors were favorable to him as well. He would continue for as long as it took. Fugaku shook himself out of his musings as he arrived home. Right now he had a problem to deal with. He prepared to summon 2 of his most loyal clansmen, 2 who didn't mind getting their hands dirty for the betterment of the clan, and the village Hokage's office. Why is it, Dragon? The Hokage growled softly. That I find myself questioning the competence of my ANBU forces for the second time this week. Please enlighten me. The Hokage and Dragon were currently alone. Even the standard squad that stood guard over the Hokage at all times dismissed for this particular meeting. Dragon was folded in half in a stiff bow and had remained so since the Hokage first entered the room. The ANBU commander didn't dare face the Hokage at the moment, and so continued to stare at the floor, sweat dripping onto the mask that covered the ninja's face. Yes, Hokage-sama. Dragon said stiffly. It was determined that the arrest of counselors Naoki Taniguchi and Hiromi Kondo should be done quietly. We also wanted them to panic and possibly expose other conspirators or vital information. I had 1 ANBU squad waiting at each of their residences to arrest them once they arrived home for the evening. We also took the opportunity to search through their records for any evidence of treason or other crimes. Unfortunately, the counselors never arrived home. Both Taniguchi and Kondo tripped while walking down a set of stairs and broke their necks, although they fell in different locations. The Hokage rubbed the bridge of his nose as he tried to keep his temper in check. It beggars belief that both of them would just happen to accidentally die just before they were arrested for treason. Did you not have ANBU squads following them? I did, Hokage-sama, and neither squad reported anything unusual. However, our intelligence analysts have been going over the records we retrieved from their homes, and they have found an interesting pattern. Both Taniguchi and Kondo have been meeting with the chief of police on a regular basis, and often at the same time. I questioned the squads who were following them again, and both reported that Taniguchi and Kondo were approached briefly by a police patrol after they left the council meeting. The patrol consisted of 2 ninja, both Uchiha. The Hokage said slowly, as if tasting the word. Has an autopsy been performed yet? Were there any traces of genjutsu? The traces were faint, but they were present, Hokage-sama. Dragon replied. The Hokage was silent for several minutes as his mind churned the pieces falling into place and painting an ugly picture. Fugaku's ambitions were well known among ninja and civilian alike, and the popularity of the Uchiha clan in general and Fugaku in particular had risen to new levels in the wake of the tailed beast's attack. Not for the first time, the Hokage cursed Madara Uchiha. Fugaku's grandfather had been an incredible ninja, nearly as powerful as the first Hokage himself, but it was his cunning and foresight that had proved the most troublesome. Madara had insisted that the Uchiha be given sole control of the internal police within Konoha as a condition for joining the village. At the time, it had seemed like a meaningless concession to a man desperate for any sort of official recognition. In the wake of his failure to gain the title of Hokage, the brilliance of the move had slowly revealed itself over the years, and it seemed to be reaching fruition now, long after Madara himself had passed away. By maintaining control of the police force, the Uchiha were able to keep their weaker ninja within the walls of the village, where they would be safe and gainfully employed while still registered as active ninja in good standing. While the Senju would send their ninja out into the field to die, the Uchiha would remain home safe and sound, steadily growing their clan's numbers. The results were plain to see. The Senju, initially more powerful and numerous than the Uchiha, had been whittled down to a single female member who was nearly past childbearing age and showed absolutely no interest in continuing her clan after the death of her lover. Meanwhile, the Uchiha had grown to become the most populous and powerful clan in the village. Only the Hyuga could claim to rival the Uchiha's numbers of active ninja, and that only due to a quirk of fate which allowed the Hyuga's bloodline limit to manifest in every member without fail, while the Uchiha bloodline activated in only a third of the clans members. Fugaku had taken this advantage even further by actively currying favor with the civilian populace. The civilians were already inclined to trust the Uchiha as a matter of course, since the Uchiha were highly visible as the core of Konoha's police force, while other ninja were fighting and dying outside Konoha's walls. To protect and strengthen the village, the Uchiha would parade in front of the civilians, and occasionally break up drunken brawls or arrest a thief. Despite this disparity, the average civilian, if asked to name all the ninja they knew, would likely come up with two names: Hiruzen Sarutobi and Fugaku Uchiha. Even the legendary Sannin Sarutobi's former students were likely to be forgotten or overlooked, especially since none of them had been seen in the village in years, if for very different reasons. Now, less than a century after the village's founding, the Uchiha were poised to take control of the entire village, and never let go. Sarutobi was willing to admit to himself that, taken solely on his own merits, Fugaku could probably handle the mantle of Hokage well enough, even if he lacked a true will of fire. After Minato's death, Sarutobi despaired of ever finding another ninja who could be a true successor. In his weaker moments, he even contemplated just turning the whole wretched mess over to Fugaku now and stepping back to watch the man deal with the headaches that came with the title he was so desperate to achieve. However, his own will of fire had not weakened so much that he was willing to just abandon his post to a lesser man. He had many years left and plenty of time to find a more suitable candidate or groom one from among the veteran ninja, and that was the crux of the matter. Really, Fugaku, for all his skill and political acumen, was not now and would never be an acceptable candidate in Sarutobi's eyes, because once Fugaku became Hokage, he would never let the title pass outside of the Uchiha clan. He would make sure his older son Itachi was groomed for the position, and he would fully expect Itachi to do the same for his children. Sarutobi would readily admit that Itachi had already proven himself a genius, graduating the academy at the age of 8 after only 1 year. 4 years before most students could even hope to, only 2 ninja had accomplished this feat prior to Itachi: Kakashi Hatake and Minato Namikaze, both of whom had gone on to become S-rank ninja before they reached the age of 20. There was another more serious problem, one that Fugaku, and indeed Madara, had likely overlooked or ignored: the perception the other ninja in the village had of the clan. Even if Itachi proved even more capable than Fugaku, that would not change the fact that the other ninja would not accept the beginning of an Uchiha dynasty within Konoha. Since so many of the clan took permanent posts within the walls of Konoha, they had alienated their fellow ninja, who had no choice but to take risky missions outside the safety of Konoha, beyond the police force, which many ninja considered a joke. There were very few postings that did not require at least some experience in the field, and all of those were limited to the intelligence divisions. No ninja who had ever met a Nara would dare underestimate the power of solid intelligence and good planning, and many owed their lives to insights and secrets uncovered by the intelligence division. Conversely, no ninja who had ever met a member of the permanent police would dare allow themselves to become that weak and arrogant, and many refused to even acknowledge them as active ninja. The last problem with the Uchiha was their bloodline limit. Even with 2/3 of the clan never activating it, the clan as a whole was inordinately proud of the Sharingan. The so-called copy will at once awaken the Sharingan, increased the effectiveness of an Uchiha ninja many times over, and that was without considering its more advanced uses and abilities. Even at its most basic level, the Sharingan increased the Observational abilities of a ninja tenfold, allowing the user to pick up on subtle details and clues that they would miss otherwise. As the Sharingan matured, the user could track fast-moving objects with ease and even predict an opponent's actions based on the subtle tensing and shifting of their bodies. When fully matured, the user could actually copy any techniques they observed perfectly and reproduce them on command. At any point thereafter, the average ninja would be willing to give nearly anything to obtain even one of those abilities, and the Uchiha got all of those abilities and more for simply being born. What concerned Sarutobi at the moment, however, was the last ability of the Sharingan, its ability to detect and even cast genjutsu or illusion techniques. A skilled user could implant subtle genjutsu, merely be making eye contact, and the technique would be nearly imperceptible to both the target and anyone observing. With the revelation of Fugaku's close involvement with the two counselors and their all too convenient deaths, it appeared genjutsu had been used to cause the accidental demise of the two counselors, and of course it would be absolutely impossible to prove that the Uchiha had anything to do with it. Chakra signatures were fragile things to begin with, and it was nearly impossible to trace a genjutsu signature back to the caster at the best of times hours after the fact, and with the death of the subject it would be impossible, of course. Just because he couldn't prove it now didn't mean he couldn't put this information to good use. Dragon, I want the Uchiha in general and Fugaku in particular under observation at all times. If he meets with someone, I want to know who, why, and for how long. If he sends a message, I want a copy on my desk before he's done writing. If he so much as sneezes, I want to know about it before he's done wiping his nose. Understood. The Hokage's voice was calm and even, but the force behind his words was unmistakable. Dragon knew better than to protest the difficulty of keeping a ninja of Fugaku's caliber under such close watch. Oh, and Dragon, I think all of ANBU needs a little refresher course to keep them on their toes. Work out the schedule with Guy, but I want all of you, and that includes you, undergo an intense training session. I have to allow my ANBU the chance to keep their skills sharp. Now don't I? Dragon gulped, paling at the prospect of one of Guy's infamous training sessions. Hawk and Cat had already begun their training, and at the end of every day they were a quivering pile of bruises and pain, nearly crying at the prospect of waking up the next day to begin again. Yes, Hokage-sama. Dragon said. Konoha's northern gate. Shikaku Nara hated getting up early. He hated getting up at all, in fact finding mornings in general too troublesome to deal with, but his wife made sure that he would regret it if he was not out of bed by a time she deemed acceptable. He attributed her insistence that noon was not acceptable to the general insanity of the female condition. She had not been amused when he shared that particular insight. He let a small smile play across his lightly scarred face as he recalled the argument that had caused, or more specifically the mutually satisfying resolution to that argument. Most people didn't understand why someone so intelligent would say such stupid things, where his wife could hear. Most people also didn't understand just how enjoyable the bit that came after the arguing was. He was pretty sure Yoshino knew that he started those arguments on purpose, but she certainly wasn't complaining either. He shook his head and returned his attention to the procession that was slowly approaching the large open gates that led into Konoha. As the Jounin commander, he was deemed the most suitable representative to greet the Kumo delegation when they arrived, having the Hokage greet them personally when the Raikage was not part of the delegation would be seen as weak on Konoha's part, but as Kumo's Jounin commander was part of the delegation, anything less than his counterpart would be an insult. Shikaku wondered again why he had agreed to accept the role of Jounin commander when Kensuke stepped down from the position. He knew that it was largely a thankless job that involved lots of stress and paperwork and very little benefit. Oh right, he was the best candidate and knew just how important a skilled Jounin commander was to the continued safety of Konoha, and Yoshino threatened to make him sleep on the couch if he turned down the offer. Troublesome. He straightened from his customary slouch as the delegation finally reached the gates, his eyes sharp as he studied the group. He quickly noted that every single one of the 10 members of the delegation were ninja, and he suspected, given their age, the way they moved, and their general demeanor, that each was at least an A-rank threat. It seemed Kumo was taking this opportunity to show off a bit, subtly highlighting the fact that they had that many powerful ninja to waste on a diplomatic mission that required no particular skill, even as he settled on that as the most likely scenario. His mind was sorting and ranking several other scenarios which called for the skills and power of 10 veteran ninja, the potential assassination of the Hokage foremost among them, in risk if not in likelihood. Kumo and Konoha had been on opposite sides in the Third Shinobi War, but their clashes were infrequent and the losses between the villages light enough that peaceful relations had resumed less than a year after the end of the war, a stark contrast to the outright hatred. IWA still held for Konoha. Those peaceful relations had led to the possibility of an actual alliance between the two villages, and the purpose of the delegation's visit this week. Konoha's Jounin commander stepped forward to meet the leader of the Kumo delegation, a tall, thickly muscled man by the name of Katsuo Maruyama. Maruyama wore Kumo's standard Jounin outfit, a dark blue flak vest, a mesh undershirt with no sleeves, black pants fashioned of a warm thick material, the exact composition of which was a closely held secret, and black combat boots. A large sword was strapped to his back, and various pouches filled with gear festooned his body. His arms were covered in scars to the extent that he had less unmarked flesh that he did scar tissue. His face was unmarked, however, and his thick jaw and brown eyes were currently set in a carefully neutral expression. Shikaku looked much smaller and ill-equipped in comparison. He wore Konoha's version of the standard Jounin outfit. The flak vest was a dark green. The mesh shirt had sleeves that stopped halfway down his biceps. The boots were replaced by sandals, and the pants were thinner and fashioned of a different material, but the outfit was otherwise identical. He only had 3 pouches on his person and no visible weapons, and he stood a full head shorter than his counterpart. His frame also lacked the bulging muscles of the Kumo ninja. The overall effect made Shikaku seem like a child compared to the Kumo ninja, which he figured was the entire purpose. He hated posturing. It was too troublesome to deal with. Fortunately, it was also too troublesome to act intimidated when he was already close enough to immobilize the entire delegation before they had a chance to respond. Greetings, I am Shikaku Nara, Jounin commander. On behalf of Hiruzen Sarutobi, 3rd Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato, I welcome you to the village and bid you a peaceful and productive stay. Shikaku intoned formally. Katsuo stared at him for a long moment, looking for something and appearing slightly disappointed when he didn't find it. Nara, the shadow-wielding clan, he said finally. His eyes flicked downward, taking in their location. Due to the position of the sun, the entire delegation was bathed in the shadow of the tall gates. Katsuo's eyes narrowed slightly, but he gave no other reaction. The other members of the delegation shifted uncertainly as they heard Katsuo's words, and also noted their location. We have heard many tales of your exploits in Kumo. Of that, Shikaku had no doubt. Kumo technically had the largest force of active ninja in the elemental nations, but were only considered the 3rd most powerful of the 5 great villages. Their relative weakness, so Kumo believed, was due to the very small numbers of bloodline users in their village. Konohagakure no Sato actually had the most registered bloodline limits of any village, but most of their bloodlines were of limited utility. They still managed to maintain a reputation as the 2nd strongest village based on the prowess of the Kagaya and Yuki clans, along with their infamous 7 swordsmen. Konoha itself was acknowledged by all as the strongest village, and it was due in part to the power and versatility of their bloodline users, exemplified by the Hyuga and Uchiha clans. Kumo made no attempt to hide their interest in recruiting bloodline users, although so far they had failed to find any new bloodlines or lure a clan away from another village. Shikaku had no doubt that their interest in Konoha stemmed from their interest in Konoha's bloodlines, and that Kumo hoped to lure a clan or at least a clan member away from the village in some fashion. However, their previous attempts had been relatively benign, and Kumo in general had a reputation for straightforward and honest dealings, so the intelligence division rated the likelihood of a forceful attempt to be low. Looking at the assembled Kumo ninja before him, however, Shikaku shifted the odds of that approach a little higher. If still unlikely, I too have heard of you, Maruyama-san. They say you once killed 3 ninja with a single swing of your sword. Shikaku replied, allowing a bit of his usual lazy tone to leak into his voice. Maruyama grinned widely, revealing shiny white teeth. It was 4, he said. He appeared to be completely serious. Shikaku nodded slightly, accepting the correction without comment. He knew it really was 4. A Konoha informant had actually witnessed the event. Now he also knew Maruyama was a braggart and was willing to give away information in order to maintain or enhance his own reputation. Useful information to have, and he would put it to good use in the coming negotiations. If you will follow me, I will escort you to your hotel. We have reserved the entire 3rd floor of the floating leaf for your use during your stay, and I hope you will find it to your liking once you have settled, and I will escort you to the Hokage's tower for the first meeting at noon. Maruyama nodded sharply. Very well, lead the way. Nara-san, Yamanaka residents come on Naruto. I promised Shika and Chuji I would introduce them to my new little brother. We can go visit them and be back before anyone even knows we're gone. Ino whined, pulling softly at Naruto's arm. Naruto steadfastly refused to move. Yamanaka-san was very clear that I was not to leave the premises for any reason until told otherwise. I believe he was worried that I would be recognized, Naruto said evenly. Ino sighed. She was very happy she had a little brother now, but she had already noted that he had a disturbing tendency to follow the rules. She frowned slightly, recalling her conversation with her father the first evening after Naruto had come to live with their family. Chan, Ino asked softly. She was technically supposed to be in bed right now, but she couldn't sleep while this question burned in her head. Naruto-kun doesn't look like he was hurt after I broke my arm. I had to wear that arm thing for forever. Why doesn't he have one of those? Her father sighed, but sat up in his chair and motioned for her to come closer. When she was close enough, he picked her up and plopped her down in his lap. Well, sweetie, there are many different kinds of hurts. Sometimes the hurts are easy to fix, like your arm, even if it's not fun while that happens. Other hurts you can't see, but they can be just as bad or worse and can take a long time to fix. Naruto has one of those kinds of hurts. It's on the inside, and it's going to take daddy a very long time to help him. Oh, Ino said quietly. How is he hurt? He didn't answer for several seconds, and she was afraid she had asked a bad question somehow before she could say anything. However, he finally replied he believes that he has to act like an adult all the time. He doesn't think he's allowed to have fun or act like a child or even just relax. Part of how I'm going to help him is to let him know it's alright just to be a kid. I'm hoping you can help me with that. He could really use a friend, and I know you would be a wonderful friend and an even better older sister. Of course, he chuckled. Ino didn't fully understand the explanation, but she got the important parts. Have fun, help him act like a kid, be an older sister. She could do that. She could definitely do that. Well, here was a perfect opportunity to show her little brother how to have fun. Besides, little brothers were supposed to listen to their older sisters, so really she was fixing two problems at once. Tisk, little brother, you should know better than to question your older sister. Kids are expected to break the rules sometimes. It's practically a rule of its own. Deciding to ignore the irony of her previous statement, she moved on quickly. And besides, if being recognized is the problem, you just have to wear a disguise. She clapped her hands excitedly. I have the perfect one in mind. I'm not wearing a dress, Naruto said immediately. Ino waved her hand airily. It didn't even look good on you. Your hair isn't long enough yet. Naruto asked, his tone faintly incredulous. Anyway, that's not what I had in mind. I've got a much better idea than that. Nara compound. Shikamaru. Nara was lying on his back staring up at the sky as the clouds passed overhead. The familiar crunch of a potato chip and the crumple of the bag which contained them let him know that his best friend Chuji Akimichi was sitting next to him. Rabbit, Shikamaru said lazily. Another crunch. Duck. Another crunch. Table. Another crunch. A loud rustle as the bag was balled up and tossed aside, and a new one open. Roast chicken. Another crunch. Deer. Another crunch. Ino. A tree. Wait, what? Shikamaru quickly sat up and turned to look at Chuji. Chuji simply pointed off into the distance towards the entrance to the Nara compound. Shikamaru squinted. Sure enough, he could make out Ino and some other kid walking towards them. Ino was wearing a large sun hat that almost swallowed her entire head. She kept pushing it up out of the way as she stomped towards them, apparently having trouble seeing in front of her as it slid down her face. Behind her trailed another kid, this one wearing a bandana and sunglasses in what Shikamaru found to be such a blatantly obvious attempt to hide his identity that it was almost subtle, given that Ino most likely came up with it. However, he settled on just blatantly obvious. Troublesome, Shikamaru muttered and flopped back down on his back. He had already picked up his father's habit of saying that word, which had led to an argument between his mom and dad where she was actually angry instead of her usual amused. Angry. Ino didn't seem to appreciate his use of the word too much either, though Chuji didn't mind at all. That was why Chuji was his best friend instead of Ino. Well, one of the reasons anyway. As Ino continued to make her way towards them, Shikamaru began to make out what she was saying. Honestly, like, I haven't been here loads of times before and they were laughing at us. Ino said, technically I think they were just laughing at you. They really didn't know who I was. The other kid replied, not helping. Ino yelled, sorry Nachan. The kid said. Shikamaru didn't think he sounded all that sorry, though. He sounded more like he wanted to laugh himself. So this was the infamous little brother Ino had been raving about. Yesterday, Shikamaru was pretty sure they were both supposed to stay at the Yamanaka residence, although he was not at all surprised to learn that Ino had slipped out. Ino came to a stop in front of Shikamaru and Chuji, pulling the hat off her head as she stared at them for a long moment. Shikamaru still hadn't moved from his position. He was wearing a light blue shirt and black pants, and his black hair was pulled up into a spiky ponytail that stuck up from the back of his head in an imitation of his father's hairstyle, a style most people referred to as the pineapple. Chuji was wearing a green and white jacket with blue pants. His hair stuck up wildly in all directions, and he had red swirl marks tattooed on both cheeks. He spared a quick wave to Ino and her companion before he returned to consuming his potato chips, already halfway through the freshly opened bag. Honestly, could you two be any lazier? You're supposed to at least stand up when a lady is present, you know, Ino said. Chuji looked vaguely guilty, but Shikamaru just snorted. When one shows up, let me know and I'll think about it. Why you? Ino sputtered indignantly. Shikamaru just chuckled to himself and Chuji bit off another potato chip to cover up his own laugh. Anyway, aren't you going to introduce us? Shikamaru said, finally sitting up again as he looked at Ino's companion. Ino took a moment to recover, but she quickly brightened. Right, Shika. Chuji, this is my new little brother Naruto. Naruto, the lazy one on the ground, is Shikamaru Nara and the one eating chips is Chuji Akimichi. The newly introduced Naruto pulled off the sunglasses and bandana and then smiled at the two kids. Shikamaru and Chuji were both surprised to see blonde hair and blue eyes, and for a moment they wondered if Naruto really was Ino's brother. Blonde hair was highly unusual in Konoha, and Naruto's eyes were only a few shades off from Ino's. Shikamaru quickly dismissed that idea but focused on the name Naruto. I've heard that name before. My dad was talking about you. Something about ridiculous test scores. Naruto smirked slightly. I wouldn't say ridiculous, he said. Ino had no such problem. Yep, totally ridiculous. I bet he's even smarter than you. Shika. Oh, you wouldn't happen to play shogi, would you? Shikamaru asked. His dad had taught him how to play the game, and while Chuji and Ino had shown no interest, Shikamaru still wanted to find someone to play against on a regular basis. His dad was perfectly willing to play, of course, but their relative skill levels were still too far apart for it to be anything other than a teaching exercise. Naruto hummed thoughtfully. I have heard of it, but I've never gotten the chance to play. If you want to show me the rules, I'm willing. Shikamaru grinned and hopped to his feet with far more alacrity than most would expect him to be capable of. Follow me, he said, and moved off towards his house. Chuji pulled himself to his feet and quickly followed. Ino grinned and pulled Naruto along with her. Come on, it's time. Someone showed Shikamaru up, and you, little brother, are the perfect one for the job. 2 hours later, Ino was still crowing in delight. Ha, I told you. To be fair, Ne-chan, I only won once, Naruto said. Shikamaru just shook his head, still shocked by how quickly Naruto had picked up the game. And you just started playing? I've been playing with my dad for months now. You're really good. Shikamaru grinned, excitement shining in his eyes. I can still beat you though again. Oh, I think you've played enough for today, don't you? A new voice said. Ino paled dramatically and Chuji almost choked on his chip. Shikamaru just shook his head with a muttered troublesome. Kiku Yamanaka stood tapping her foot impatiently in the doorframe. And just what little lady did you think you were doing sneaking out of the house in the middle of the day and taking Naruto-kun along with you? No less. Naruto stepped bravely into the line of fire. I thought it was a rule that children were expected to break the rules on occasion. Kiku Kaa-san, Naruto asked. Ino squeaked when Kiku turned to glare in her direction. Not helping. Yamanaka residence. Inoichi's office was situated on the ground floor of his home, tucked into a quiet corner. The furniture inside the office emphasized comfort over aesthetic appeal, and the decorations consisted of simple paintings of forest scenes from around Konoha with the occasional knick-knack that held some personal significance to Inoichi's desk was well worn but also well cared for, the inevitable nicks and scrapes picked up over the years serving to make it seem homely rather than broken down. There were 3 chairs in the room, one placed behind the desk and 2 placed in front of the desk, currently positioned to face each other. Naruto was already perched on one of those chairs, his feet not quite reaching the floor when Inoichi closed the door, activated the privacy seals built into the room, and then settled into the chair across from Naruto. He had a few pieces of paper and a pencil prepared to take notes during the session. Now Naruto, before we begin, I want you to understand that while these sessions are required, if at any time you feel uncomfortable or don't want to answer a question, we can cut the session short or move to a different topic. These sessions will continue for as long as needed, and I don't want you to feel pressured into anything. Okay? Naruto nodded. He had yet to say anything since he first entered the room. Inoichi let out a slow breath. He sincerely wanted to help Naruto, but he wasn't looking forward to seeing just how deeply Konoha's resident Jinchuriki had been scarred by his time in ANBU HQ. The pieces he was already aware of, the emotional detachment, the complete lack of concern for his own safety, the obsession with proving himself, were bad enough. Right then, let's start with something recent, shall we? Naruto cocked his head a little to the side and looked at him curiously but remained silent. I understand you and Ino snuck out to the Nara compound yesterday. Inoichi stopped there, curious to see how Naruto would respond to the open-ended statement. He didn't have to wait long. I apologize for disobeying your instructions, Yamanaka-san. However, with the disguise, I believe the risk of exposure to be minimal. Inoichi kept his face calm and pleasantly curious, suppressing his wince though expected. It was painful to know that Naruto still viewed the situation as a mission. His continued insistence on calling him Yamanaka-san, despite his easy manner with Ino and Kiku, showed that Naruto viewed Inoichi as a superior officer rather than a parental figure. These sessions probably weren't going to help that particular issue either. As far as the disguise goes, you are correct. No one recognized you as Naruto or even paid you and Ino any particular attention. You appeared as simply 2 children pretending to be ninja. Inoichi reassured him. However, what made you decide to risk it at all? Naruto shifted slightly, a small sign of nervousness or discomfort. Interesting. Inoichi made a note of this reaction. Naruto hadn't appeared nervous at all when apologizing, but the reasons behind his actions made him Uncomfortable, Inoichi didn't pressure him, simply waiting for Naruto to answer or ask to move to another topic. At length Naruto finally replied, "I was curious. Ino had mentioned her friends before and I wanted to meet them," Naruto said. Inoichi made several more notes. Ino had claimed that she pressured Naruto into it, almost desperate to make sure that no blame fell on her little brother, and now Naruto was subtly implying that he had come up with the idea on his own, transferring the blame to himself. To Inoichi's knowledge, this was the first time Naruto had acted protective of another person. Further, this was also the first time in nearly 2 years that Naruto had made any effort to reach out and form a connection with another child his own age. While Ino and Naruto were getting along far better than he had dared hope, they now lived together and Naruto did not need to make a special effort to establish or maintain a relationship. The same could not be said for Shikamaru and Chuji. "And what did you think of them?" Inoichi prompted. After he finished writing his notes, Chuji was very quiet, but he seemed happy to be there and did not resent my presence. "Shikamaru was very skilled in shogi. I look forward to playing against him again," Naruto said. He seemed to be finished speaking, but then hastened to add, "The mental exercise could prove beneficial in the future." Inoichi's eyebrow raised slightly. Naruto apparently felt the need to justify his interest in shogi. Ino had already told them about the games Naruto and Shikamaru had played, as well as making sure to mention at least 50 times that Naruto had beaten Shikamaru. Inoichi decided to follow up on the shogi games. "For the moment, is that the only reason that you look forward to playing again?" Naruto shifted slightly again. "No, it was fun challenging." Inoichi smiled. "That's good to hear. Do you enjoy any other games?" Naruto's head cocked to the side again. "I don't know," and there went his smile. "What other games have you played?" A blank look. "Checkers." Naruto shook his head. "Tag, another shake. Hide and seek, another shake. Card games. Go fish. Old maid poker. More shakes." Inoichi felt a ball of unease settle in his stomach. He knew from the reports that Naruto had not gotten along well with the other kids in the orphanage and that he eventually buried himself in his studies, but he had not realized that Naruto's isolation had been this complete. He fell silent as he contemplated just what effects that could have on a child and what that would mean for Naruto. After a minute of silence, Naruto spoke. "Yamanaka-san, I have a question about the interactions I observed between Shikamaru and Ino." Inoichi pulled himself out of his thoughts, cursing himself for getting distracted while he was with a patient air. "Yes, what is the question?" He tried to recall if Ino had mentioned anything unusual about her time in the compound, but couldn't come up with anything. "I noticed that they exchanged what should have been insults on multiple occasions, and that Ino delighted in Shikamaru's defeat. When I won, I have observed similar interactions among other children before, but I always assumed that they were enemies or otherwise competing. Ino and Shikamaru seemed very friendly despite these insults." "I don't understand," Naruto explained. "Well, here would be one consequence already." Inoichi jotted down a few more notes before he leaned back in his chair. "This explanation could take a while." Kushu smirked internally as the Yamanaka launched into his explanation of teasing. The question was half serious and half distraction. He understood much better than he let on what was happening, but this discussion would later branch into other areas of human behavior which he did not understand nearly so well. If he was stuck talking to this human for the foreseeable future, he might as well get something useful out of it. More importantly, focusing on how humans usually behaved would steer the conversation away from his own motivations, and allow him to better explain his more questionable actions in the future, considering the psychological training he would pull out of Inoichi during these sessions and the connections he was already forming among the most prominent clans in Konoha. Joining the Yamanaka family was proving to be the best thing to happen to him. Since he was sealed now, he just needed to prepare for his Nin training with Shizen. For now, there was much to learn from Konoha once his strength had grown to acceptable levels and he had acquired all the knowledge and skills he cared to. Well, that would be an interesting day. Yamanaka residence. Ino was sitting in the living room helping her mother sort through the laundry. Despite the peaceful surroundings and pleasant days, she was uncharacteristically quiet and subdued. Her parents had not been happy at all that she had taken Naruto outside. Despite the perfectly good disguises they had used, they had made it clear that Naruto could have been in a lot of danger, though they avoided specifying why exactly. It had taken them a while, but they had finally impressed on Ino that she could have gotten Naruto hurt again, and Ino had taken the revelation to heart. That didn't stop her from thinking about how to help Naruto. However, Naruto had only been with them for 5 days, but as far as Ino was concerned, he was a permanent part of the family. She had also had a lot more fun than usual hanging out with Shikamaru and Chuji when Naruto was with her. Despite their friendship, Shikamaru and Chuji were a lot closer to each other than either was to her. Even beyond the obvious boy-girl differences, Naruto's presence, even the playing field, even when he was playing shogi with Shikamaru, he still paid attention to her. It was nice to be included like that. She had also noticed that Naruto had enjoyed meeting Shikamaru and Chuji. He certainly didn't act sad or anything when it was just the two of them, but when the 4 of them were playing around, Naruto was more something she couldn't quite describe it, but she thought the difference was what her parents meant when they said better even when they got back home and both of them were in trouble. Naruto hadn't said one bad thing to her and she had been afraid he would angry or upset with her. In fact, he had even thanked her. Ino was certain that if she introduced Naruto to the other kids she knew he would have more friends and get even better, but since he couldn't leave, that really left only one option. Kaa-chan, Ino asked timidly. Kiku said aside the shirt she was folding and turned to face her daughter. Yes, Ino-chan, do you think I could invite all my friends over for a sleepover? Kiku frowned. Now Ino-chan, you know that you are being punished for sneaking out of the house yesterday. This is hardly the best time for you to have a party. But Kaa-chan, it's not for me, it's for Naruto. When her mother didn't immediately reply, she rushed to explain her reasoning. You and Tu-chan both said that Naruto didn't have any friends before and he had a lot of fun yesterday, and Shika and Chuji both liked him, and I know my other friends will too, and he'll like them, and then he'll have more friends. And Ino-chan, calm down. Kiku interrupted her. But Kaa-chan, Ino pouted. I understand, Ino-chan, and I'm very proud that you are thinking of ways to help Naruto. I'm also happy that you decided to talk with me before doing anything this time. Ino blushed, but didn't say anything. I'm not saying yes, but I will talk it over with your father and see what he thinks. Ino's smile lit the room and she jumped over to hug her mother. Thanks, Kaa-chan. Okage's Tower Council chambers. As the current session of the negotiations between Konoha and Kyumo broke for lunch and the various counselors began to stream out of the room, Inoichi called out to Hayashi. Hyuga. Hayashi paused and turned his pale eyes watching Inoichi approach curiously. Hayashi was a tall man, his form thin and well-muscled, his immaculately groomed black hair hung halfway down his back, gathered into a loose ponytail. He was currently wearing the traditional attire of the Hyuga clan, which consisted of thin layered robes of various shades of ivory and white. His headband hung around his neck, barely visible beneath his robes, leaving his unmarked forehead bare. Yes, Yamanaka-san, can I help you? Hayashi asked coolly, his posture stiff and his tone polite as it always was in public. Some people found this typical Hyuga attitude elitist or insulting, but Inoichi knew that the demeanor was at least partially a front. When Hayashi was among friends he acted considerably more open and relaxed. My daughter is throwing a sleepover party with her friends and she wanted to invite Hinata-chan and Niji-kun. The event is planned for 2 days from now, starting that afternoon, Inoichi explained. Hayashi nodded thoughtfully. I assume the Nara and the Kimichi children will be there as well. Inoichi nodded, pleased that Hayashi was at least considering it. In his opinion, the Hyuga children didn't spend enough time with children outside the clan, and this event would be good for them. Kiba Inuzuka and Shino Aburame have also agreed to attend. I'm also planning to invite Sasuke Uchiha, but I wanted to ask you first. Hayashi smirked slightly. If Sasuke was next, then that also meant the Uchiha were being asked last. Inoichi knew him quite well. Apparently Hayashi didn't mind being asked second to last since their families were not nearly as close as the others, but to be asked after the Uchiha would have been insulting. That aside, this party represented a gathering of every clan with a seat on the Konoha Council. Hinata and Niji would likely be working with these children for the rest of their lives, and it would be a good opportunity to form bonds with their future comrades. Hayashi did not immediately agree, however that simply wasn't the Hyuga way. I assume this event is prompted by your new guest. It was Ino's idea, actually, but yes, you are correct. I will need to think it over further, but for Hinata, at least consider the invitation tentatively accepted. I will of course forward Niji's invitation to Azashi. Inoichi knew that think it over further was code that meant Hayashi would talk the idea over with his wife, his Anna, but didn't comment. He knew how that was. After all, that's great, and thank you. I look forward to seeing them, Inoichi replied. If Inoichi and Hayashi had been paying more attention, they would not have casually dismissed the Kumo ninja lingering outside the doors to the council room talking with a civilian counselor. They would have also noticed how his ears perked up at the mention of the name Hinata and the calculating gleam that entered his eye as the conversation continued. Yamanaka residence. Kiku opened the door to find 2 members of the Aburame clan standing before her. Both were wearing the high-collared gray jackets and sunglasses typical of the clan, although the effect was less mysterious and intimidating on the 4-year-old there. It just looked adorable. Hello Shibi-san. Shino-kun, I'm glad you could make it. Shikamaru and Chuji have already arrived and they are playing out back if you want to join them. Shino-kun, Kiku said cheerfully. Shino nodded, falling short of the intended imitation of his father's manner and landing solidly in cute territory. As far as Kiku was concerned, she smiled and watched him make his way through the house towards the back, then turned to Shibi. I really am glad you could make it. Do you want to come in? Shibi hesitated for a moment then nodded. Kiku led him to the living room where Shikaku, Chusa, and Inoichi were chatting away, reliving some tale from their days as Gen and teammates. They all stood and welcomed Shibi, cheerfully bringing him up to speed on the current tale. So Ichi here got the bright idea that he would scale up the side of the building and try to use his mind transfer technique through the window. Mind you, the target was a civilian, but they were also hosting a party and the place was pretty crowded. He had just learned the technique and had been itching for an excuse to use it for weeks, and by Kami he had decided that now was his chance. Chusa said, barely keeping control of his laughter. Shikaku had no such problem and was already chuckling to himself. Inoichi had his head in his hands and was groaning, already dreading the rest of the story. Kiku rubbed his shoulder comfortingly, but her other hand was covering her mouth, and her shoulders shook suspiciously every now and then. Shibi himself had never heard this particular story and was most curious as to where it was going, so Shika and I are keeping a lookout for him while he takes aim. He takes a good 2 minutes lining up his shot, and when he finally uses it he immediately falls off the building. This much we expected, and we catch him and hightail it out of there, moving back to our own hotel room to wait for him to finish the job. About halfway there we realize something went wrong when he starts sucking his thumb. Shibi raises an eyebrow and his insects start a low rhythmic humming that the others recognize as the Aburame version of a laugh. Inoichi just groans, knowing the story only gets worse from there. So we make it back to the hotel room, but Inoichi hasn't returned to his body yet. We figure that maybe he found a way to finish the mission anyway and are ready to applaud his resourcefulness. In the face of Chusa breaks off for a moment to get his laughter under control. In the face of adversity he barely manages to choke out, but when he finally gets back an hour later he's got a stupid grin on his face and no information on the target at all. Naturally we don't let it rest at that. Shikaka takes over the story at this point, a sly grin on his face. Inoichi's head snaps up in panic as he realizes his wife hasn't heard the whole story prior to this, and that Shikaka doesn't intend to give the edited version this time. It turns out that he'd managed to miss his target and hit a baby instead. As if that weren't bad enough, it seems it was time for the baby to be fed, and he spent the entire hour breastfeeding. Inoichi winced as Kiku's comforting hand on his shoulder suddenly turned into a death grip. Honey, she growled. Inoichi sent a death glare at Shikaku and Chusa, who seemed to be enjoying his discomfort immensely, then turned to face his wife with a pleading expression. In my defense, I was 13 at the time, and I fully intended to turn the situation to my advantage. He certainly did. Chusa choked out before collapsing into laughter once again. To gather information, Inoichi said firmly, but the woman just put me in a crib and left. At that point I returned to my own body. Kiku did not seem at all swayed by this explanation, and if anything her hand tightened even further before she could say anything. However, another knock sounded at the door. We will be talking about this later, she said as she left the room. This time, when she opened the door she found 2 children waiting for her. The taller of the pair was a little shy of 5 feet tall and could possibly pass for a 12 or 13-year-old, though she knew he was only 9. His black hair was long and bundled into a thin ponytail that hung past his shoulders. He wore a black shirt and black pants along with ninja sandals and covered it all with a black cloak. A ninja headband was worn around his head, the metal plate brightly polished and shining in the afternoon sun. He wore no visible weapons, but Kiku knew better than to believe any ninja, even one as young as this, was ever completely unarmed. The boy's onyx eyes stared into hers steadily, and Kiku found herself grateful for the excuse to look away as she turned to the other child. This boy was considerably shorter and wore a blue shirt and black shorts. His hair was cut short and slightly spiky, though it seemed he was trying to grow it longer in the back. His eyes as black as his brother's, and the rest of his clans were alight with curiosity as he turned his head this way and that, taking in the new surroundings with a childish delight. Where his brother was cold and aloof, this child was open and bright, a very interesting contrast. Kiku thought. Hello Itachi-san. Sasuke-kun. Kiku said most people would feel strange addressing a 9-year-old so formally, but with Itachi it felt stranger to address him any other way. Greetings Yamanaka-san, I have come to drop Sasuke off for the sleepover. I myself will not be staying long, but I would like the chance to visit if that is acceptable. Itachi said. Of course, come right in. Some of the other children have already arrived and are playing in the back. Itachi nodded and stepped into the house, Sasuke's hand gripping Itachi's cloak tightly as he followed. Itachi paused outside of the living room, observing the clan heads gathered in the room. Their laughter slowly died off as they noticed Itachi watching them. The silence stretched for a few seconds before Inoichi called out a greeting, quickly echoed by Shikaku and Chusa. Shibi nodded politely. Itachi returned the nod and bowed slightly before he turned and continued towards the back of the house. That kid always creeps me out, Chusa said quietly. Itachi opened the door that led to the backyard to find the kids apparently caught up in a game of ninja tag. Ino Yamanaka and Chuji Akimichi were red-faced and laughing as they dodged Shikamaru Nara's attempts to catch them. Shino Aburame was currently circling around them as he kept an eye on Shikamaru Itachi. Noticed a fifth child with blonde hair and blue eyes that he had never met before but recognized as Naruto. The Yamanaka's newest guest. Naruto did not appear to have exerted himself at all, even though he was currently running back and forth throughout the area, moving teasingly close to Shikamaru before dancing out of the way, a small smirk planted firmly on his face as Itachi watched. All the children began moving in slow motion, blue flickers of chakra dancing under their skin and ghostly images preceding their every move. Itachi was shocked to find that he had activated his Sharingan without even realizing it, but before he could turn it off, his attention was drawn to Naruto. There were no ghostly images preceding Naruto's movement, and there were no blue flickers of chakra. Instead, his eyes showed Naruto surrounded by a red aura, appearing almost as if he were consumed in flames. The aura was far brighter than any child should be capable of, and certainly not a child who did not even appear to be seriously exerting himself. The aura pulsed in a regular rhythm, and as he looked closely, the three tomo that marked the activation of a fully matured Sharingan spinning madly. He could just begin to make out brief flashes of blue chakra. Every bit of the blue chakra was almost completely surrounded by the red aura, and they almost seemed to be intertwined, woven together. He had never seen anything like it in his life. When he was first informed of Naruto's status, an event that occurred the very day he activated his Sharingan, he had tried to determine what effect that would have on a child. From the descriptions of the seal, he had imagined an enormous reservoir of power lying dormant and untapped within the child's body. This was not dormant. He was pulled from his thoughts as Sasuke tugged on his cloak and he shut off his Sharingan before any of the children noticed. Although judging by the look in Naruto's eyes and the curious tilt of his head, he may have been a little too late. The other children saw that Naruto had stopped running and turned to follow his gaze. When they saw the two new children standing there, they called a temporary halt to their game and hurried over to greet the newcomers. The Uchiha did not have close bonds with any of the other families invited today, but the children had met Sasuke before. Itachi they had only heard about. "Hey Sasuke," Ino called out, waving. "Is this your brother?" Sasuke nodded a little shyly, still slightly uncomfortable among the children. He did not know that well. "Yeah, this is Itachi Nii-san. Cool, I'm Ino Yamanaka. It's nice to." "Holy crap, is that a ninja headband?" Itachi's expression did not change as he replied, "Yes, I have already graduated the academy." "That is so cool," Ino yelled. Shikamaru and Chuji also appeared to be impressed. If the faintly dumbstruck looks on their faces were any indication, is that unusual? Naruto asked, his head still tilted and his eyes focused on Itachi. Ino jumped in before Itachi could respond. "Very, that means he graduated after just 1 year and he's already a gen, and he's gotta be like super strong to do that." "Hey, I bet you could do that too, little brother." She seemed excited for a minute, then suddenly looked worried. "But don't do that," she contradicted herself. "If you graduate early we can't be on the same team." Naruto didn't respond right away, his eyes still fixed on Itachi. "I'm not so sure, Ne-chan. I don't know if I'm strong enough to do that." Ino seemed to take this as a personal insult. "You are too. You could totally graduate in a year. I bet you could do it in like 6 months. She shook herself again. "But don't." Itachi's eyes never wavered as he met Naruto's calculating gaze with his own. He had heard rumors of the intelligence of Naruto, although the boy was still far too young to evaluate the level of his physical skill and chakra control. Still, Naruto's gaze held nothing childish. There was curiosity, but no wonder it was steady, calm, evaluating. It was a ninja's gaze. No, it was the gaze of a predator. His eyes itched to activate again, to use the power of his bloodline to dissect and examine the oddity that was Naruto. But now was not the time. He spoke again, his gaze still locked with Naruto's in their impromptu contest. "Sasuke, I will be heading out now. I must return to my duties. I will come by tomorrow to pick you up to return home. Enjoy yourself," Itachi said. "But Ni-san," Sasuke said, his voice not quite a whine. Itachi finally turned his gaze away, ignoring the feeling that he had somehow lost a contest. As he turned to Sasuke, his right hand emerged from his cloak with his index finger extended. The hand slowly moved towards Sasuke before finally poking him in the middle of the forehead. "Foolish little brother," he said fondly. "Ni-san, don't do that," Sasuke said, rubbing his forehead. His voice was definitely whining now, and the other children stifled a laugh. Naruto watched their interaction curiously. Itachi shook his head and turned. He moved away in a quick shunshin, the world whipping past. As he left the Yamanaka's backyard, he would need to think on what he had seen today. His instincts screamed that Naruto was dangerous. Even as young as he was, he found it ridiculous to think that a 4-year-old could be a threat, but he had learned long ago to trust his instincts. Those same instincts had led to him mastering his Sharingan years before most Uchiha even activated theirs for the first time. After all of his instincts said Naruto was dangerous then, Naruto was dangerous now. He just needed to figure out why. Outside the Yamanaka residence, Kaido Miyazaki had been a jounin of Kumo for 15 years and he had very little to show for it. Oh, he wasn't hurting for money. He lived in a comfortable apartment and had enough money saved for a rainy day, but those sorts of things didn't mean anything to Kaido. He craved recognition, the kind of recognition Maruyama got even in a village as far away as Konoha. Kaido wasn't a particularly good ninja, but he wasn't a particularly bad ninja either. No bad ninja would ever survive long enough to make full jounin, and Kaido was actually above average as jounin went, and in one particular area he was far above average. It just wasn't an area that got a lot of attention or glory. It got plenty of respect among those in the know, but the very nature of his exploits prevented him from attaining the glory he so desperately sought. Kaido was an infiltration specialist, the best in all of Kumo in fact, but you don't go bragging to other villages or even your fellow ninja about how you stole secrets and successfully infiltrated enemy villages. So Kaido suffered for years under the irony of achieving incredible feats that benefited his village, and not being able to tell anyone about it. Well, that all ended tonight. His original mission, the mission of the entire delegation in fact, had been to gather as much intelligence as possible on Konoha while the negotiations took place. As far as ninja affairs went, this was practically expected, and Konoha had actually done a very good job of subtly guiding their search for information in directions that seemed promising but were ultimately useless or meaningless. If Kaido hadn't been lucky enough to overhear the conversation between the Yamanaka and Hyuga clan heads, the delegation would likely have gained little information of value. In fact, under normal circumstances even that information would have been considered irrelevant or useless, but where his fellow ninja would have seen a useless bit of trivia, Kaido had seen a golden opportunity. He had kept that bit of information to himself and directed his intelligence efforts into discovering everything he possibly could about that sleepover. What he found was practically the perfect opportunity to cement his name into Kumo legend forever. The Hyuga and the Uchiha children would both be attending this party outside of their heavily protected and fortified clan compounds. Even better, the event was taking place on the night before the delegation was scheduled to leave. If the plan worked out as it should, Konoha would be forced to release the entire delegation due to lack of evidence, and within the day he would be well on his way to Kumo with two of the most powerful bloodlines in all the elemental nations as his prize. He was practically drooling as he imagined the rapturous welcome he would receive when he reached his village. He watched as the last of the guards moved out of range and quickly dispelled the security seals guarding the window on the ground floor. As he had expected, each family had provided a ninja or two to watch over the house for the duration of the night, but the guards were relaxed and inattentive, secure in the knowledge that they were guarding an already highly secure ninja compound in the middle of a highly secure ninja village. Kaido would admit that the compound was well secured and there were signs that the security was currently being upgraded even further, but he had dealt with far worse in his day. Static defenses were almost always less troublesome than human guards in his experience, and these guards were relatively pathetic. He grinned to himself as he slipped inside, carefully watching for additional security. As he made his way towards the upstairs bedrooms where the children were sleeping, Kaido could perhaps be forgiven for overlooking the obvious flaws in his plan. The infiltration itself he had planned well, and his extraction plan was acceptable if a little optimistic. However, if he had taken a more objective look at the situation rather than allowing his greed and ambition to cloud his judgment, he would have realized the political ramifications that would likely lead to the Fourth Shinobi War if he successfully kidnapped two prominent members of Konoha's most powerful clans. Of course, on this particular night, that was the least of his worries. Yamanaka residence upstairs bedroom. Kushu's eyes snapped open as a tantalizingly familiar scent wafted into his nostrils. It was incredibly faint, and it took him nearly a minute to finally place the smell, but when he did, he almost unleashed a victorious howl. For the first time since his return to the human realm, he had caught the scent of his brethren, two of them in fact, Saika the Two Tails and Itsuzan the Eight Tails. Given the age of the scent, he knew that whoever or whatever currently carried it had not met them recently, but this was the first real lead he had gotten, and he was not about to let it go swiftly. But quietly getting to his feet, he stepped over the sleeping bags containing the other children. As he moved towards the door, pulling it open and taking a deep whiff to track down the new scent, he slipped out into the hallway behind him. Ino rubbed her eyes tiredly as she noticed him leaving the room. She almost went back to sleep but was curious as to what her little brother was up to, and so got up to follow him. Kushu followed the scent downstairs into the kitchen, where he observed an unfamiliar ninja with his entire form concealed in black form-fitting clothing. The ninja was incredibly quiet, his clothing barely making a rustle as he moved slowly through the room towards the stairs, but it was the scent that Kushu was following. Kushu spoke quietly so as not to alert the rest of the house that could wait until he had gotten the answers he wanted. If you answer my questions I might be inclined to allow you to leave quietly, he said, hiding in the shadows and using his yuki to make his voice seem much deeper than it normally was. It wouldn't do for the ninja to realize he was being questioned by a child. The invader froze, spreading his arms slightly to show that he was unarmed. Ask, he bit off angrily, but still making sure to keep his voice low. Where are you from? Konoha, of course. Where else would I be from? Kushu inhaled deeply. I think not. You are definitely not from around here. I'd say you are part of the Kumo delegation. The way the invader stiffened slightly and refused to answer was all the confirmation he needed. Kushu nodded in satisfaction. Yes, Kumo, it is all right. Next question. When and where did you last come in contact with a Jinchuriki? What? The invader asked incredulously and a little too loudly. There was a muffled thump from the hallway and both Kushu and the invader froze. They both turned slowly to look at the door, then watched in disbelief as Ino walked into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes tiredly. Naruto, what are you looking for? With the lights off, she said, and flipped the switch. For a long moment both Kushu and the invader stared at Ino. She blinked her eyes again, then looked at the strange man that was standing in her parents' kitchen. Her eyes grew wide as the threat began to register and her mouth opened. Then all hell broke loose. The foreign ninja moved in a blur as he rushed forward, his hands dipping into pouches tied to his legs. Kushu cursed loudly and sprang into action, channeling Yuki into his muscles to increase his strength and response time. As he leapt into the air, he found it curious that he had chosen to aim at Ino instead of attacking the invader directly. Then his body slammed into hers and she was thrown back into the hallway. Two kunai ripped into his body, and blood flew through the air. Ino's strangled scream coincided with the shattering of the living room window, the front door nearly being thrown off its hinges as it slammed open, and a door upstairs being thrown open with a loud bang. Loud screeching sounds filled the house and chakra visibly rippled over the walls as multiple security seals were tripped and alarms sounded. The noise was almost deafening, but it certainly seemed to have done its job. Kushu watched in fascination as several indistinct blurs moved in the kitchen and hallway. One blur intercepted Ino and vanished from sight, presumably removing her from the battlefield. He saw another headed for him, but it was cut off by two blurs that locked together and resolved into the intruder and a Hyuga. The intruder snarled and reached into his pouch for another kunai, but suddenly froze with his hand halfway there. The Hyuga's eyes were bulging, veins visibly throbbing around his completely white eyes, showing that he had already activated his bloodline, the famous all-seeing eye. The Byakugan, his hands glowed faintly blue as they blurred through the air, striking the intruder with a series of feather-like touches. The intruder's eyes widened in horror and disbelief, and he remained locked in position for a long moment. Then the shadows around his feet suddenly thinned, and he dropped like a puppet with its strings cut, unconscious before he even hit the floor. Impressive, Kushu said, or rather tried to. The word escaped his throat in an indistinct breathy gurgle. Surprising him, he looked down and finally noticed the two kunai sticking out of his body, one lodged deep in his chest and the other sticking completely through his stomach. He allowed his attention to drift internally for a moment and realized that the first kunai had pierced his right lung while the second had sliced through his stomach and only narrowly missed his spine. He detached his senses as the pain began to register and focused on repairing, or at least stabilizing, the body as best he could until a mezzanine arrived and he had a template to work from. The body's eyes drifted shut as it began to shut down, but its ears remained open, and Kushu listened to the events occurring around him. Get a fucking mezzanine in here right now, goddammit! Inoichi screamed, ripping off his nightshirt and pressing it to Naruto's body in a vain attempt to staunch the flow of blood. Barely a week in his home and already the boy was dying again. He spared a moment to be thankful that Ino wasn't present to see her little brother like this. Before he was shoved aside by an ANBU, he almost lashed out before he noticed the green glow around the ANBU's hands that signified the use of a medical jutsu. He let out a shaky breath as he stumbled to his feet, nearly slipping in the blood pooling around. Naruto, Kami, how did such a small body hold so much blood? Because that's all the blood. He has a small voice whispered in the back of his mind. He refused to even acknowledge the thought and turned his attention to the piece of shit that had broken into his house and tried to murder his son. The blood began pounding in his ears as he stepped towards the man lying prone on the floor. That he was already unconscious was all that kept Inoichi from beating him to a pulp, though it didn't stop him from planting a vicious kick in the man's ribs. The ANBU, stripping the man of any weapons and tools, tensed slightly but continued working without comment. When Inoichi made no further move to attack, that didn't stop Inoichi from nearly decking the Hyuga guard. When the man touched his shoulder to gain his attention, Inoichi's face twisted darkly. How the fuck did that piece of shit get in my house? The Hyuga guard was tense but did not cower or back away in the face of Inoichi's anger. It appears that the intruder slipped between our patrols and deactivated the security seals on the living room window in order to gain entry. Inoichi almost asked how the guard could know that before realizing that his Byakugan was still activated. The all-seeing eye allowed the user the ability to see in all directions at once, greatly increased the range of the user's vision and allowed the user's sight to penetrate solid objects. Despite appearing to look directly at Inoichi, the Hyuga could actually observe the entire house without moving his head or even shifting his eyes. The Byakugan also allowed the user to see even the faintest traces of chakra. Most ninja could only see chakra when it was released outside the body in large quantities, but a Hyuga could even see chakra inside another ninja's body or even inside objects, an ability that they had used as the basis for an absolutely devastating taijutsu style. The Hyuga continued his report. Judging by the residual chakra still draining from the seals, the intruder has been in the house less than 3 minutes. Given that he was in the kitchen at the time of his discovery, it would appear he was moving very slowly to avoid activating any of the internal security measures, as it was he still needed to disarm the security seals at the bottom of the stairs, the top of the stairs, and any of the individual rooms. Inoichi nodded shakily. Despite the situation, the breach wasn't nearly as bad as it appeared. If Ino and Naruto had been upstairs, the intruder would almost certainly have been caught by the guards patrolling the grounds or set off one of the seals and alerted the entire household. Inoichi turned to find Ino and figure out why she and Naruto were out of bed when the Hyuga guard's eyes widened, an incredibly disturbing sight. With the Byakugan activated and his head turned to look up the stairs, Inoichi followed the Hyuga's gaze and his own eyes widened. Standing at the top of the stairs, faces white, eyes wide and mouths gaping, were the other children. Shit, he muttered under his breath and quickly ran up the stairs to block their sight of Naruto. Once he reached the top of the stairs, he mustered the most authoritative voice he could without sounding harsh or angry. "All right, all of you go back to your rooms. The situation is under control and Naruto is receiving medical attention." He couldn't bring himself to say that Naruto would be fine. He knew mentally that Naruto had already survived being stabbed in the heart, but that knowledge seemed weak in the face of the scene he had witnessed downstairs. He noticed that the children were no longer looking downstairs, but now they seemed to be staring at him, faces still white and eyes round. Even as he looked down at himself and realized that the front of his pants from the knees down were soaked in blood and that his hands had smeared blood over part of his torso and probably his face, he realized grimly. Kiku finally stumbled out of their bedroom, a robe hastily thrown on over her nightgown. As a civilian, even one married into a ninja family, she reacted far more slowly than Inoichi. He still wished she had managed to reach the hallway before the children, though he wasn't sure she could have handled the sight of Naruto any better than the children had. "Honey, what is going on? Kami, Inoichi, are you alright? What's happened? Where's Ino? Where's Naruto?" she asked, beginning to panic. Inoichi started to raise his hand to stop her, but realized that the sight of the blood probably wouldn't help the situation much. He settled for trying to talk over her. Kiku, Ino's fine, the situation is under control, please help me get the kids back into their room." She nodded shakily and started gathering up the kids, ushering them back down the hallway. Inoichi was just grateful that she hadn't noticed the omission of Naruto's state just yet, though he didn't expect that to last long. The children were coming out of their shock and he could hear the sniffles starting as they began to cry. She'd learned soon enough that Naruto was most certainly not fine at the moment. After a quick stop in the bathroom to wash the blood off his face and hands, and another stop in his bedroom to get a fresh set of clothing, Inoichi made his way back downstairs. Naruto was no longer present, and the Hyuga guard Hiroshi, Inoichi finally remembered, confirmed that the ANBU had stabilized him enough to move him to the ANBU hospital again. Inoichi nodded, then set off to find his daughter. He found her in the living room completely hysterical. While the Nara guard Kuda tried to awkwardly comfort her, Inoichi waved him off and sat down next to her, wrapping her in his arms. When she realized who it was, she started sobbing into his chest, muttering something over and over. He eventually made out that she was saying, "Sorry Ino, honey, it's not your fault, it's okay, it's not your fault." He kept repeating, and Ino slowly calmed down enough to speak coherently. "What happened?" Inoichi asked gently. It took Ino a few more seconds to gather her thoughts. "I heard Naruto get up and head downstairs, and I followed him to see if he needed help or something. I thought that he..." Ino started to cry again, and it was a few more minutes before Inoichi could get her to continue. By this time the other parents had begun arriving, their clothes hastily thrown on as they rushed over to see to their own children. Chusa and Chikaku had already checked on their sons and left their wives upstairs while they came back down to give Inoichi some support. They had seen the large amount of blood in the hallway and already noticed that only a single child was not present, and none of the other children appeared injured in the slightest. Their faces were grim as they sat nearby listening to Ino. "I thought that he might be looking to get a drink, or maybe he had a bad dream. I just wanted to help him." She looked ready to cry again but pulled herself back together. "I heard something in the kitchen and thought it was Naruto, but when I turned the light on there was someone dressed all in black standing there. The guy jumped at me, then Naruto came out of nowhere and pushed me back into the hall, and then there was blood everywhere and Naruto was Ino dissolved into tears again, and Inoichi let her cry it out. He'd gotten enough information. He felt strangely proud of Naruto. A little over a week ago Naruto's first response to danger had been to obliterate the threat. Now apparently his priority had shifted, such that he was willingly throwing himself into danger to protect his sister. Inoichi blinked, startled at that thought. Apparently at some point in the last week he'd started thinking of Naruto as a permanent part of the family rather than as just a patient or the boy who was living with them. He also realized he'd thought of Naruto as his own son earlier. He tested the thought again. It felt strange and different, but also very right. He was worried that this change in perception would only make the loss that much harder to bear if Naruto did not survive. He'd seen enough trauma to know that the other children, especially Ino, would already bear scars from this night. If Naruto died, those scars would only get worse. ANBU HQ medical wing. Shizen burst into the operating room and moved swiftly to the operating table. She had a full kit of her own medical supplies strapped to her body securely, but the rest of her clothes were hastily thrown on. Her shirt appeared to be inside out and her pants were wrinkled. Her hair was pulled back with what appeared to be ninja wire status. Shizen snapped, her hands glowing green as she activated her own healing jutsu. One of the mednines stepped back to allow Shizen better access to Naruto and brought her up to speed. He was brought in with 2 stab wounds, both caused by kunai, which were still present in his body. We focused on removing the kunai in his lung first, and are currently working on stabilizing his breathing and slowing the blood losses. Chakra is reacting strangely to the treatment, however, and we are having trouble isolating the wound to begin the necessary repairs. Shizen cursed, damn it, didn't you read the reports from last week? The mednine shuffled uncomfortably and shook her head. You can't isolate his organs from his chakra or his body begins to shut down. Just ignore his chakra and focus on healing the wound. But what about the chakra reactions? The mednine stuttered. Of all the get the hell out of the way, Shizen snapped. Shoving the other mednines aside, she focused both her hands on Naruto's right lung, moving the blood out of his lungs and slowly repairing the damage from the inside out. She may not have been involved in his last surgery, but she had made sure to question the mednines involved extensively on what had happened and how Naruto's chakra reacted as she expected. As her healing jutsu began its work, Naruto's chakra swirled around hers for a few seconds before moving to other parts of the wound. Even expecting it, she was still stunned by the speed at which Naruto's chakra healed the wound. In less than a minute his lung was completely healed, and as with the stab wound to his heart, she could find no evidence that he had ever been stabbed at all. Forcing her wonder aside, she moved her hands to the kunai still lodged in his stomach. One hand gripped the kunai and slowly began to back it out, while the other healed the damage it left behind. By the time the kunai had been completely removed, the wound was purged of contaminants and was sealed tightly as before. There was no sign Naruto had ever been injured there. She let out a relieved breath and slowly relaxed. An operation to heal wounds of that magnitude on a child would normally have taken hours and probably failed anyway. Once Naruto's chakra was allowed to assist, it took less than 5 minutes. Her mind drifted to the possibilities of such an ability. If Naruto could do the same for other people, if he could, he would be far and away the best mednine to ever walk the elemental nations. Making herself and her teacher look like bumbling idiots, she resolved to push forward with his training as much as possible. Regulations be damned, she was drawn from her musings when Naruto opened his eyes. Hey Shizen-chan, I guess you're the one who healed me this time, he asked, his voice steady. She lurched forward and gathered him into her arms, holding him tightly as a few tears spilled down her cheeks. Yeah, Naruto-kun, I healed you, you're alright now, she said more to herself than Naruto. His hands patted her back gently as he returned the hug. It's alright Ne-chan, you're an awesome mednine, of course you could fix me right up. The other people in the room just watched the scene dumbly, still shocked at Naruto's incredibly swift recovery. To them it appeared almost as if Naruto was comforting Shizen rather than the other way around. Yamanaka residence. Makoto Uchiha was the last parent to enter the living room after Inoichi called for them all to gather. While Inoichi had nothing against her personally, he was disgusted to note that her husband had not bothered to show up in person. He didn't care much for Fugaku, but he had thought the man at least cared enough for his family to make sure they were safe and sound. Itachi, the nearly emotionless genius who had already become a genin, had accompanied his mother to the Yamanaka residence. Neither Makoto nor Itachi said a word about Fugaku's absence, but the way Makoto's fists clenched and Itachi's face tightened when his absence was commented on showed they were not particularly happy with him either. Why are we here? Tsum Inuzuka asked bluntly, her hair even more untamed than usual. She had at least taken the time to throw on her jounin uniform, though the vest hung open. Her canine partner Kuramaru was sitting at her feet. He kept sniffing the air as if looking for something, drawing the occasional curious glance from the other occupants of the room. Not to insult you, Inoichi, but I'd feel much better if Kiba was back at home with me, and I'm sure the others feel the same. Inoichi waved off her concern. I understand fully. I am not the one who called us together. However, Shibi adjusted his sunglasses slightly. No one found it the least bit odd that he was still wearing them in the middle of the night. Everyone in the room knew that the glasses were not worn for protection from the sun. Then, who called us together? He asked. That would be me, Sarutobi said, entering the room. The other occupants startled slightly but quickly snapped off salutes and polite greetings. Sarutobi waved them off impatiently. All of your children were potentially threatened by the events of this night. Even if it was Naruto-kun who bore the brunt of the attack, he is fine. By the way, Shizen-chan says he will make a full recovery. A small lie, since Shizen had said Naruto was already completely recovered, but the other people in the room didn't need to know just how fast Naruto could heal. Inoichi let out a shaky breath and wiped his hand over his face. He was most definitely not crying. He felt Chuza and Shikaku both put a hand on his shoulder and sent them a grateful nod. Sarutobi smiled at Inoichi briefly before his face turned serious again. We have begun interrogating the intruder, but we already have a rather interesting piece of information. His identity. Grim faces stared back at him, waiting for him to continue. The intruder was Kaido Miyazaki, part of the Kumo delegation. As expected, the ninja in the room began to mutter angrily, hands twitching towards their weapons. Tsum appeared ready to rip the delegation apart with her bare hands, a feat she was certainly capable of. Unsurprisingly, it was Hayashi whose mind turned to the political implications. Are they going to demand that he be released into their custody? The Hokage smiled, his eyes glinting dangerously. Why would they need to? Kaido is still present in the hotel after all. Clearly the man who broke into this house was an imposter attempting to frame Kumo and disrupt the treaty negotiations. As any good ally would, we will do all in our power to uncover the true identity of this ninja and inform Kumo when they discover that Kaido replaced himself with a clone supplemented with a genjutsu, and that the intruder was in fact Kaido. After all, well, sometimes our interrogators go a little too far, and irreparable damage is the unfortunate result. The other ninja nodded, understanding the Hokage's message. Sarutobi then looked at Inoichi directly. Your former apprentice might require your assistance, Inoichi. It would be a shame to deprive him of your guidance on this occasion. Inoichi shot to his feet, a genuine smile on his face. Understood, Hokage-sama, thank you, he said, then vanished in a shunshin, heading to the torture and interrogation department. It was Shibi who asked the next question. What if the rest of the delegation was involved? After all, Hokage-sama, there was nothing kind or gentle about the smile on Sarutobi's face. Then diplomacy will be the least of their concerns, he said.